Good evening and welcome to the first in a series of forums for candidates for office here in Cayuga County that we are holding in conjunction with the Citizen and the college's telecom department. These are forums that will be shown on Spectrum, Verizon, Fios, and ARMA, the Auburn Regional Media Access, and played on the college's radio station WDWN. I'm your moderator, Guy Cosentino. On November 5th, voters in the 8th Legislative District for Cayuga County will be able to go to the polls to elect a representative to represent them come January 1st. The district includes the towns of Genoa, Locke, and Venice in the southern part of the county. This race is a rematch of sorts with incumbent Joseph DeForest seeking a second term, and the man he defeated, who was a legislator in that district for the previous 4 years, Hans Petcher, facing him off. The position of a member of the county legislature is a part-time job that has a base pay of $13,500. The 15-member legislature has 8 Republicans and 6 Democrats and 1 independent currently. So with about almost half of the legislature up this year and 4 competitive races, this year's election could shift the control of the legislature from Republican to Democrat, reversing a change that occurred about a year ago when 2 Democratic legislators changed their party registration. Representing the press today, as usual, is a familiar face, Jeremy Boyer, the executive editor of The Citizen, who's been kind enough to ask questions for some 10 to 12 to 15 years. So welcome back to the studio. Prior to the taping of the show, the candidates drew lots to see what order they would be going in for their 2-minute opening statements. The order will be reversed at the end of the forum for their closing statements, and they are sitting in the order they will be presenting. The first one is on the Honorable Joseph DeForest, who is on the Democratic and Working Families Party line, and Hans Petcher, who's on the Republican and Conservative lines. Gentlemen, welcome to the studio. We'll start off with your 2-minute openings. We have Kevin, who's a student here, timing you, and he'll give you the signal when you're close to 2 minutes. So again, we'll start with Mr. DeForest, who's on the Democratic and Working Families Party line.
Thank you. Good afternoon, citizens of Cayuga County. My name is Joe DeForest, and I'm running for legislature in District 8, Genoa, King Ferry, Locke, and Venice. I was born and raised here. I married Kathy, my wife of 48 years. We raised our daughters, Lily and Zella. I've worked and lived most of my life here and plan to continue to reside here in Cayuga County. In these difficult times, we need to seek out and make available solid and sustainable economic opportunities to keep and attract the upcoming generations. We can do this by preserving and protecting our resources, our land, and our lakes. These resources and our residents make our county a viable entity that can attract more tourism, more industry, and entrepreneurship while sustaining farming and its related agri-industries. These resources, if creatively and carefully managed, will retain, attract, and afford families a satisfying quality of life for generations to come. I'm serving the 4th year of my first term as your county legislator. I approached my term with the understanding that I had plenty to learn about the inner workings of county government and how to create paths forward to serve the needs of my constituents. I've learned that solutions require seeking common ground and forging relationships with fellow legislators, department heads, our county employees, and you, the citizens of Cayuga County. To that end, I have served on all the legislature's special committees. I've been chairman of Health and Human Services, and I'm currently chairman of the Government Operations. I have served as a legislative appointed board member for Cayuga County Soil and Water District, Cornell Cooperative Extension, the County Parks and Trails Commission, the County Tourism Board, and the Central New York Regional Planning Board. By being an active, vocal, and dependable participant in the legislature's committees and in my board appointments, I believe I can continue to play a significant role in shaping and advancing Cayuga County's abilities to better serve its citizens effectively and efficiently. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. DeForest. Mr. Petcher, welcome. Mr. Petcher is on the Republican and Conservative line. Sir, you have 2 minutes for your opening statement as well.
Well, I haven't got much to say. I would rather go on to the questions right away, but I would say I'm Hans Petcher. I would like to be reelected, and I think it's necessary to reelect somebody who understands government, can make it work, because currently our government is not working too well. We have too many problems in our government, such as having to buy out administrators, such as emergency management office not functioning, properly, and many other problems. And that's about all.
Thank you, sir. We'll now have Mr. Boyer ask you questions, both of you questions, either in order or separately, depending on if it's for a specific candidate. If it's for a specific candidate, we'll let their opponent respond with 1 minute. Kevin, our timekeeper, will hold up his yellow card at 1.5 minutes, and then at 2 minutes he'll hold up the red card to tell you that you need to wrap up. Mr. Boyer, welcome back.
All right, thank you, and thank you for coming to answer some questions and hopefully help voters to decide or see the differences here between the two candidates. I'd like to start with a few questions that are going to be related to the county administrator position, which is vacant currently. It's been that way since June roughly, and one of the things that has to happen going forward is the legislature has to decide on what to do with the position itself. Right now, the administrator is the appointed chief executive for county government, but there's been 3 options kind of discussed. We could stick with the administrator form. We could go to an elected executive position like we see in some of the larger counties, or we could go back to the system where the county chair was the day-to-day chief executive of the government. So my first question for both candidates is what direction do you support and why?
Mr. DeForest, we'll start with you. You'll have 2 minutes on this subject.
Serving as chair of government operations, I've seen firsthand the dysfunction of leadership in our county. There's plenty of blame to be shared for that dysfunction that has led to the failure of retaining a county administrator. I served on a special nonpartisan committee with my colleagues that, with the aid of a professional consultant in leadership, helped develop an outline for the hierarchy and various relationships of leadership at the county. The outline spelled out the relationships and duties of the county administrator. A new culture was to be created to escape the pitfalls of past relationships with administrators. The administrator was to be in charge of the day-to-day operations of the county. Simply stated, a chain of command was to be established. Department directors were to report to the administrator. The administrator would report to the legislative chairman, and the chairman would report to the legislature. Individual legislators at any time could access the administrator with questions or concerns, but as much as reasonable, the chain of command was to be followed. The local law also spelled out the duties of the administrator in great detail. Both the outline and the local law were accepted by the majority of legislators. Many participants at every level had difficulty adhering to guidelines of the outline and local law that we all created. I maintain we do not need to reinvent the wheel. We need to operate in good faith with the guidelines and laws we create. If an outline or law is not serving the better need, we need to tweak it. We need to be mindful that changes of policies, new position creation, merging or creation of departments that an administrator suggests all have costs associated with them, and the legislative body ultimately has the power of the purse. That is a major check available to keep an administrator in check as necessary.
Thank you, Mr. DeForest. Mr. Petcher, on this issue of the 3 systems.
Well, Joe is talking about a wheel. Well, this particular wheel ought to be thrown out. We need to try something different. And I think the proper solution is an elected county administrator who is answerable to all the people rather than just a few of the legislators. We can't afford to keep paying out $150,000 a crack for people who are leaving. And we can't really expect too much from these people who are basically seeking to go on in their careers and go to other fields, and we're just a stop on their way up. I campaigned for a form of elected executive a good many years ago, I think about 30 years ago. Unfortunately, it didn't go very far, and instead the county adopted the manager or the administrative system. And now is the time to start working towards a better system of government for all our people. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Petcher. Mr. Boyer.
In a related question, I guess I'd like to go back to the decision to terminate Justin Woods, who was the administrator. Simple question, did you support the decision to fire Mr. Woods, and why?
Mr. Petcher, you're up first. 2 minutes.
Everything that I've heard justifies the firing of Mr. Woods. My problem is with the $150,000 that he was given as a going-away present. There was another administrator who was also let go just previously for less money. It's the whole form is wrong in that as a legislator I want to be able to talk to anybody, department heads, employees, or whatever. This stepped-up system, or this where you got to go through all the ropes, just doesn't suit our style for a country community. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. DeForest, on this issue of Justin Woods and his termination.
I did not support the release or firing of the past county administrator. I had great difficulty understanding why we would go down a path of releasing him without cause. And when I say without cause, that cause was never explained fully to my understanding. I think it's important to keep in mind that the infrastructure, or not the infrastructure, but the hierarchy that we created was a bipartisan effort. It was nearly unanimously approved. And if we can't abide as a body by the outlines and guidelines and laws that we've created, then perhaps we have to look at ourselves for the failures.
Thank you, sir. Mr. Boyer.
Just to follow up kind of on what Mr. Petcher said and what you're alluding to too, Mr. DeForest. To what degree, if you're elected and you're a county legislator, to what degree do you believe you should be getting involved in day-to-day decisions and dealing with employees or in dealing with citizen concerns and complaints about county government?
And we'll start with Mr. DeForest first.
My policy has been, if I'm a chair of a committee or if I have been made aware by a constituent of a difficulty that's arisen, I will try to discuss that matter with the person that is most closely in charge of that problem. I don't go looking for problems. I don't feel that's my job. If I don't hear of a report and things appear to be running smoothly, then I feel it is my place to stay out of it. We have very good professionals that head up departments, and at no time have I ever felt that a department head was being restricted from speaking to me or to any other legislator. Well, I hope that answers your question.
Mr. Petcher.
Basically, one of the things I've learned over the years, no matter what institution you're in, quite often talking to the janitor gives you more information than talking to the top ranches. So I think as legislators we should have the opportunity, shouldn't be restrained from the opportunity to talk to anybody all the way up and down the chain of command. This is not giving orders, this is just finding information, not making decisions.
Okay. Thank you. Mr. Boyer.
Just to kind of clarify, and I apologize if I didn't word the question precisely enough. If we could even just think of a scenario where, I'm just trying to understand where you go with information under our current system, basically. So say a citizen in your district is upset because a road isn't getting plowed correctly. Not to say that would ever happen. I'm sure our DPW does a fine job down there. But just as an example, if they come to you directly, they see you at the store or something and say, hey, I've got a problem, where do you take that information? Do you take it to the head of the highway department? Do you take it to your legislators? Do you take it to the administrator? You know what I mean? What sort of is the next step for you in dealing with that kind of a situation?
I think we were Mr. Petcher's turn for this one.
Well, it depends on the severity of the problem. If it's a minor thing, somebody's mailbox getting hit, things like that, I would contact the highway superintendent and have him address the issue.
Mr. DeForest.
I would communicate with the chair of the committee that pertained to whatever department or problem was perceived. And I would also say in the instance of a road condition or road problem or whatever, I would be contacting the road supervisor and the chairman of Public Works Committee.
Thank you. Mr. Boyer.
I'd like to get your sense of how county government is running now, currently with the administrator position vacant. We have basically, from my understanding, day-to-day operations are kind of being run by the chairman, Tucker Whitman, as well as Lloyd Council, who has stepped in to help out. He's his main role has been assigned counsel and Stop DWI and Youth Bureau. But I'm just wondering your sense of how the system is operating these days in the county office building, as far as leadership and direction and keeping things moving.
Okay. Legislator, you're up first in regards to the work being done by Mr. Whitman and Mr. Hoskins.
At best, I think both were thrown into a very difficult situation with the dismissal of the administrator. As many of us are aware, there were a number of problems that we had positions that needed to be filled, among them EMO. There was a restructuring of Public Works. And all these things were in motion and on the way to some type of fruition or fulfillment when the administrator was let go. It has created a vacuum, not having that one person who truly can make the day-to-day decisions of what's going on in each department and dealing with problems quickly and efficiently as they arise. We have a chairman that is a legislative chairman that I feel works very hard to do the best he can in a, at best, part-time situation. And we have a interim figurehead in Lloyd who does a very good job considering the fact that what his position and duties are as interim director are still very much in the air and not clearly defined. So very quickly, in answer to your question, I think we're doing the best we can given the situation we're in.
Mr. Petcher.
From what I'm hearing, things are progressing slowly but surely. I hope they get better. We, as taxpayers, certainly need them to get better. And that's about it.
Mr. Boyer.
One of the things that, especially as Mr. Woods was working in the job, he was often referring to policy recommendations and other things that were brought out by the CGR report. That was a $75,000 assessment that a consultant did for county government to really look at the organizational structure and how everything operates. So that's a 100-page document roughly. It's got a lot of material in there. I'm guessing both of you have seen it at least a little bit. So I'm just wondering, that's not that old of a document. but we're in a lot of transition. Is that something that still should be used actively by county government going forward or not, and explain why?
Okay, Mr. Petcher, on the issue of the Center for Government Research out of Rochester, their report.
I'm not familiar with the report, so I really can't comment on it. But I think we have too many reports already. When I was there, we had expert reports on just about every subject under the sun, and they're all on the shelf and sit there, and that's probably where this report ought to sit too.
Mr. DeForest, on the CGR report.
I sat in on a great many meetings concerning the CGR report. Again, reports are, if they sit on the shelf, they're of no use. And in those types of instances, they're a waste of money. I don't feel the CGR report was a waste of money. It created an outline of different course corrections the county could take. Among them were looking at better ways that departments could share services and staff, possible consolidation of departments, and just better ways and more efficient ways of doing business, cutting out duplication and of services, and finding ways to better address purchasing. And so I was a strong proponent. And again, the report itself, the report was asked for. There was a vote taken, and again, it was another vote that had a great deal of support for it going ahead. And the thought was, with a new administrator coming in, that we would attempt to start to facilitate some of the course corrections and suggestions in the report.
Thank you. Mr. Boyer.
One of the suggestions, which was, I guess it was implemented, but it's kind of in a state of flux now, is the creation of the Department of Public Works, and that essentially brought a number of departments: highway, buildings and grounds, parks and trails, and I believe it was weights and measures under a Department of Public Works chief. And pretty soon after that was established, the DPW person stepped down, and I know some legislators are debating about, did this fail, or is this something we should try to stick with and hire a new DPW superintendent? So that's my question for both of you: is should we stick with that DPW the Department of Public Works structure, or should we go back to the old system?
Okay. Mr. DeForest, you're first up on this one.
Well, my first recommendation is that we figure out the leadership solution. I hate to see us scrap the idea of a combined, of the restructuring of Public Works, but in order for that to succeed, we have to have strong leadership. And without a guiding hand of leadership, the newly configured department floundered and was deemed a failure. It will remain a question as to whether it was the right move or whether it could succeed or not succeed if we don't have leadership to steer the way. And currently, my impression is that the framework will probably be scrapped. And I feel we don't have enough information at this point to know whether it could be a success or not.
Okay, thank you, Mr. DeForest. Mr. Petcher, on the issue of DPW.
Well, first, it should never have been created because basically it consists of another high-paid position, another $100,000 that the taxpayer has to cough up, which I can't see why it's necessary. When I was in the legislature, the department heads of the various entities seemed to have a pretty good grasp on what they were doing, and having somebody over them to report to them and then have that person report to the administrator or whatever just doesn't make much sense. it's a waste of money as far as I'm concerned. It should be scrapped as soon as possible.
Thank you, sir. Did you have a response?
I do have a response.
You have 1 minute then.
I would suggest that one of the problems, one of the shortfalls of the legislature, and it's not just been in the last 4 years, it's been for the last 8 years and maybe longer, is the fact that we have not had a commitment by the legislature or necessarily by administrator or department heads to do long-term planning. That was one of the things that the Director of Public Works was to take a look at, was long-term planning for capital planning, for buildings and grounds, for parks, for the highway department. And contrary to some thinking, there does need to be additional time made and spent for that kind of planning and thinking. And it hasn't been done in the past, and it certainly needs to be done in the future.
Thank you. Mr. Petcher, anything to add?
No,
Okay.
I'll skip that one.
Mr. Boyer.
Well, maybe this kind of leads into my next question. Speaking of long-term planning, a big question mark for a few years now has been the county office building, the main downtown Auburn center of county government. I know there's other buildings in county government, but a high concentration of services and employees work out of the building on Genesee Street. But it's also getting older and falling into some disrepair. The big challenge is what to do with it. Should it be renovated, or should the county be considering a new facility? So I'd like to ask you your question, or your preference on how we go forward on the county office building new or renovating, and kind of expand on that as to why and what form, or what form of renovation or what type of new building would you want?
Okay, I think we start with Mr. Petcher on this one, on the county office building.
Well, at the price of building nowadays, I'm pretty sure we can't, as taxpayers, we can't afford a new county office building. The best suggestion that I've had over the years is to keep it growing, fixing the real problems. One of the recurring things, of course, is that people get worried about is asbestos. I think that can be, nobody that I know of has come down with asbestosis yet from anything that they caught in the county office building or other county buildings. So I don't think that's a major worry as far as making some renovations. I don't know what we would do if we tear the building down, the present building down. Where do we move to? Do we free up the space for commercial use in Auburn, or do we move out to the county site where the county sheriff's offices and so forth? You know, just building creates a great many problems. Renovation can be handled. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Petcher. Legislator, the issue of what to do with the county office building.
I've mulled this over a lot, and one thing I want to say about renovating, and I do believe we definitely have to consider renovating our existing building, is that it is costly, and it becomes costly because of asbestos. And asbestos and precautions taken to deal with the remediation of that are dictated by the state. They're not dictated by what the legislature would like to do or how the county feels about it. So any renovations, there are major expenses involved with asbestos remediation, and we shouldn't lose sight of that. That's not a reason not to renovate either. I'm not taking that position. I have often thought it would be great if we could retain the parking that we have next to our county office building, and perhaps build above the parking lot so that we add an annex or whatever. It doesn't take a genius to figure out that the more we can consolidate our workforce and our various departments in one area, the better communication, the better opportunities to share resources that everyone utilizes together creates for a better working atmosphere. And that's a path I'd like to see us at least investigate and go down as annexing onto the existing building. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. We just want to let you know, if you're just tuning in, we're in the middle of our first Candidates Forum for 2019 here at Cayuga Community College and sponsored by the Citizen. This is for the 8th Legislative District, which includes the towns of Genoa, Locke, and Venice. We have in the studio with us incumbent Joseph DeForest, who is on the Democratic and Working Families Party line, and his challenger, Hans Petcher, who is on the Republican and Conservative lines. They're being asked questions by Mr. Boyer, the executive editor of The Citizen. Mr. Boyer.
Okay. I'd like to get your thoughts on water quality and drinking water concerns that have come up in the county and really in both Cayuga and Owasco Lakes in the last couple of years. And certainly there's been a lot of efforts going on to study harmful algal blooms and understand what's going on and put in systems to filter the water and make sure it stays safe. But there's still work to do, and I'd like to find out, from your thoughts as a county legislator, what the legislature itself should be doing to help address the issue.
And I believe we now start with Mr. DeForest.
Well, first of all, I applaud the efforts of all the stakeholders. It's a very complex and diverse group with different concerns, needs, and expectations. They've developed a plan to go forward to combat harmful algal blooms, reduce pollutants from various types of runoff, and remediate problem spots and preserve the integrity of Owasco Lake. My hope is, by the very nature of Owasco Lake being one of the Finger Lakes, to have the Eye of Albany and to receive funding for remediation and research, is that the plans and the surrounding stakeholders' practices will result in solutions and successes for Owasco Lake, and that they may serve as a playbook for remediation and preservation procedures on Cayuga Lake and other Finger Lakes as well. We as a county need to support every way possible a second source of water to Cayuga County as recommended by the Cayuga County Water and Sewer Authority, and that source should be Cayuga Lake. It lies on our county's southern boundary, and it offers the most economically viable solution for a second source. It's a solution that affords the county to be in control of the infrastructure and costs to its users, and it offers the same types of opportunities that we appreciate from Owasco Lake. Reliable and quality water attracts residents, industry, and tourism, and sustains agriculture. It's key to growing Cayuga County, increasing its tax base, and imperative to its well-being.
Thank you, Mr. DeForest. Mr. Petcher, on the issue of water quality.
Well, of course, it's extremely important that we have good water quality. How to achieve it is a problem. I note that Skinny Atlas Lake, which is probably one of the most controlled lakes or surrounding areas are in New York State, and Skinny Atlas Lake has had algae blooms. So it's not something unique, even with the best of controls in place. But somehow or other, hopefully the state will be willing to chip out money that water quality can be improved, not just kept where it is. Yeah, I'll stop on that.
Thank you. Mr. Boyer.
There was, and I guess it's still in the process of under consideration, new rules and regulations for the Owasco Lake watershed put forth by a steering committee that had the county's involvement. And I think ultimately that's going to come to the county legislature to ask for support. So I'm wondering your thoughts on those rules, those proposed rules as they sit now, if you support them. If not, what concerns do you have about them? What changes would you like to see?
Mr. Petcher, on the proposed rules.
I have not read the proposed rules, so I can't really comment on them. Thank you.
Okay. Mr. DeForest.
I have read the rules, and again, as I said earlier, applaud the efforts of a very diverse group of people who put those rules and regulations together. The farming community, local residents, members of the community surrounding the whole of Owasco Lake, and obviously the citizens of Auburn. All had the opportunity to give input. I think the input was very thoughtful. I know at times it became contentious, some of the debates, and I truly applaud the efforts that they were able to come up with a document that I believe is the best effort at trying to address the concerns and needs of a very diverse community. So I do support it.
Thank you, sir. Mr. Boyer.
You alluded, Mr. DeForest, to the water study and the second source. One discussion that's sort of to be had, I guess, about that is should we be consolidating water districts? We have a lot of them in Cayuga County, and water districts selling, original source selling to this district to sell to that district, and this is, one thought is consolidate everything under one umbrella. How do you feel about that approach?
I would be
Go ahead. Oddly enough, you brought it up, so you get to go first.
I would be a proponent of the consolidation of those efforts. It is getting extraordinarily costly for villages and towns to provide the necessary personnel, equipment, and facilities to maintain their individual sources. If we had two sources of water in the county, and the infrastructure was put in place by the county, certainly with financial investment from the state and federal government, because it will be costly, that would put us in control of the water rates, of the infrastructure, and we wouldn't be dependent on this constant negotiation of where do we get our water, how much do we pay for it, that many of these communities face.
Thank you, Mr. DeForest. Mr. Petcher, on this issue of consolidating water districts?
I'm pretty sure I'm not for it. The districts themselves probably can handle the matter better than county government can. I can't see the expansion of county government into that. Possibly sometime in the future we might need a county-wide system, but a lot of the country, again, our very territory that we're talking about, the farmers that need the water have taken care of the problem by themselves. There's a huge pond that's being dug now. It's probably 20, 30 foot deep, covers several acres by one of the dairies, okay? They don't need the water. They can supply their own. And for some of us who for years have taken care of our own needs, now we have to pay for everybody else's. I'm opposed to that. I think the way they're operating, the various districts that are buying water can work out the problems. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Mr. Boyer.
Okay. One thing that happened last year that took effect this year was an increase in legislator pay. Went from $10,100 as a base annual salary to $13,500. First raise in several years for legislators. My question for both of you is, did you support that increase, and why or why not, and should there be another one?
Mr. Petcher, you get to go first on this one.
I don't object to the raise as such, but one thing I tried to do when I was a legislator is try to cut the benefits to the legislators. We had situations at that time somebody getting $11,000 salary and getting $21,000 worth of health insurance covered, plus retirement being paid by the taxpayers again to the benefit of that person. Somehow there's got to be a way of equalizing it. We did at that time pass a resolution which was supposed to go into effect as of January 1st, 2016, I think it was. No more benefits, no more health insurance benefits for county legislators because they're part-time. And unfortunately, Obamacare came about that time, and the interpretations of the law was that we had to keep offering these benefits. So.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Petcher. Legislator, the issue of the...
just to follow, just the
sure.
part two, because I don't know if you caught that, is would you support, or does there need to be another raise? Or do you think 13.5 is a good
No,
spot
I would like to see some equalization in the fringe benefits, that everybody's on the same thing. At that time, I received no benefits. I didn't need the health insurance, and thus you got a gap of like $21,000 between two legislators.
So, but 13.5 is a good number for you as far as what you think legislators should be paid?
Well, if the benefits, the extra benefits could be eliminated, I'm saying could be, I wouldn't object to a raise if the money is spread out equally instead of the way it's being doled out now.
Okay, thanks. Sorry about that.
That's okay. Mr. DeForest will give you 2 minutes on the subject of legislative pay. And
4 years ago when I was here, I think I was asked the same question, or the question came up about pay. When I decided to run, I knew what was offered at the time, which was $10,000. I felt that I had been blessed with a wonderful life in my community and in Cayuga County, and I felt that if I got elected, that this would be a way to give back to the community, and said that the salary did not matter at that time, and I would reiterate that once again. And to answer the first part of the question, no, I did not vote for the raise. I understand the thinking behind it, but I felt I should stay true to the pledge I made 4 years ago, and I continue to remain true to that pledge.
thank you, sir. Mr. Boyer.
Okay. So, in addition to choosing their legislator, your district's voters will have a question. All voters in the county will have a question on the ballot this year about related to redistricting, basically. But I'll read the wording just so everyone can absorb it. The question is, shall the term of office of Cayuga County legislators elected to the term beginning on January 1st, 2022 be reduced from 4 years to 2 years to allow for redistricting based upon the 2020 census, and to set the term limit for all county legislators to a maximum of 3 full elected 4-year terms? That's a lot to absorb in one question, but my question for both of you is, do you support that? Should voters say yes or no to that question, and then explain what you would like to see happen with redistricting as we look ahead to that in a couple of years?
Mr. DeForest, 2020 is just around the corner.
Yes, it is. I have great difficulty with this whole question. Not the question you're answering. I just have difficulty with the idea of what I have a problem with is I don't personally like the idea of this setting up a situation where all the legislators, there can be a massive change every 4 years once this goes into effect. I do concede that we need to address redistricting. There's been a lot of discussion. I guess I am lucky in the district that I'm in. As far as weighted voting goes, I have a little more clout than some of our neighbors. But I don't know that that's a particularly good thing. I mean, I truly believe that if every district had the same amount of power on the weighted vote, that would probably be a more equitable form of democratic process. Having said the business about kind of objecting to this, all the legislators coming up every 4 years, if we have to do this reset in 2 years, in order to examine the whole process, the whole redistricting process, then yes, I am in favor of it. But I don't like the end result down the line.
Thank you, Mr. DeForest. Mr. Petcher, this issue of the proposition that's on the ballot come November 5th, or if you're voting early as the 26th of October.
People that I've talked to who've asked, I've recommended to them that they vote no on that proposition. I can't see that redistricting is so important. Basically, the shift in population that would bring about redistricting is not going to be that great. I see there's last I knew there was population dribbling out of the city, going into the suburbs, if you can call them that, the so-called donut towns. And there might be a slight shift there, but I don't think enough, not more than can be it can be handled by adjusting the fractional votes that we have now. Yep.
Thank you, sir. Mr. Boyer.
One thing that some folks in the legislature brought up in context of all this, discussion about redistricting is the actual number of legislative districts we have. It's 15. They're carved up all around the county. Do you think that that's the right number for us to be at, or as part of redistricting, should we consider looking at a reduction or maybe even an increase, whichever way you could go, or, Yeah, basically,
Okay.
What are your thoughts on the size of the legislature? Is it working, or do we need to adjust?
Mr. Petcher, you have 2 minutes on this issue of the size of the legislature.
I would be in favor of keeping it at 15. I can't see that reducing the number is going to do any good. Our districts out in the country in particular are large enough just to get around them is quite a chore. In the city, I can see it wouldn't make much difference because you can go from door to door fairly easily. Where out in the country, we have to drive for miles sometimes to campaign and other things. The number we had before was 20, which also seemed sufficient at the time. But when the redistricting was done, it was done with the purpose of keeping the towns whole rather than having them split down the middle and all this and that. And if we do much redistricting, this is going to, cause problems in splitting up towns, putting part of the city maybe out with a rural district, things like that I don't think should be done.
Legislator, the issue of the size of the legislature?
Well, I think any of the recent chairs in the last 4 years would suggest that 15 is a difficult number to work with. There's been a fair amount of talk, and this is on both sides of the aisle, that perhaps it would be easier to reach consensus if the number could be decreased in a fair and equitable fashion. And I agree with Mr. Petcher completely that when you start redrawing lines in towns, it makes for a lot of unhappy people to draw a district line halfway through a town or halfway through the city or whatever. But having said that, I don't have a problem with us taking the time to research and investigate any possibility that creates an effect where merging districts or shifting lines gets us closer to districts having an equal weighted vote.
Okay, thank you, Mr. DeForest. Mr. Boyer, we're most likely down to our last question or two,
Okay.
depending on how long the answers are.
All right.
And
well,
how long your question is.
I think this is a short one, a short question. I don't know how long the answer will be, but I just wanted to get your thoughts on district-specific concerns in the Genoa, Loch Venice area. Simple concept, but basically, what can county government do better for that area?
Mr. DeForest, you're up first.
I think our greatest challenge is probably the maintenance and reconstruction of our county roads. I have to say the towns I represent do a very, very good job on maintaining the roads that come under their jurisdiction. The county's been caught in a situation where it seems like we're constantly playing catch-up to get into any kind of a maintenance program that addresses roads on a regular rotation. It seems like we are constantly, and rightfully so, constantly moving to the next emergency problem spot. And I think the best answer to trying to address that situation is for leadership and the county road supervisor or director that they really work very hard to come up with long-term plans that put our roads on a rotation. If we had the money right now to just throw at the situation, we couldn't begin to get every road up to date in 5 years' time. A 5-year rotation would probably be ideal if we were at the right starting point and everything was in a good situation, but it's not. So we need to work much harder at long-term planning and trying to find a way to systematically get these roads back into tip-top condition.
Thank you, sir. Mr. Petcher, what needs to be done in the 8th District?
County roads is, as Joe said, is extremely important, or are extremely important to most of the people that I've talked to. Another thing they're concerned about is taxes, too much. And that's one thing we need to do. We need to take care of our needs more than we take care of our wants. It's nice to, do wonderful things with Emerson Park, but I think we have more important things to do than Emerson Park and other recreational areas. Use our money for what our needs are, not what our wants are.
Mr. Boyer, you got a 1-minute question or less.
Well, I guess a quick thing is, kind of off that question is how do you, as a legislator representing, as you said, Mr. Petcher, a pretty big geographic area, how do you stay connected with constituents to know, to be able to answer that question, to be able to know what concerns them and what county government can do for them? So what are some ways you would do to kind of stay in touch with people on the ground in your district?
Mr. Petcher, you'll have a minute on this.
Okay, basically trying to keep in touch with what the local governments are doing, taking phone calls, talking to people at various, wherever you meet them. That's about it.
Mr. DeForest.
I would echo Hans's statement on that. I would also say that people should really, if they have the ability and the means, they should really visit the county website. There's tons of information. I use it every day. I find that I can go back and I know in preparing for today, I was looking at some of the past resolutions and so forth. One of them was the one for the hearing on the redistricting. And with just a couple of key words, I was able to put my fingers on that very quickly without calling the legislative clerks to dig up that information for me. There's a world of information out there, and it's very easy, if you have internet service in the county, to access it and get a wealth of information. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Mr. Boyer, thank you for your questions. We're going to now turn to our 2-minute closings. As we said at the beginning, we flipped the order for closings. Hans Petcher, who is on the Republican and Conservative lines, has 2 minutes for his closing. Sir.
I won't need it.
Okay.
Basically, I hope that I get the support that I need to be elected legislator again, and what I promise is basically good, straightforward, conservative government. No waste of taxpayers' money if we can help it at all. Certainly no giveaway to administrators we fire, and hopefully to help steer the course towards an elected county executive. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. We'll now hear from Legislator Joseph DeForest, who's seeking re-election. He's on the Democratic and Working Families Party line. Mr. DeForest.
It's important to me to see my district and county moving forward, working as efficiently and creatively as possible to protect our resources, land, water, and people, to promote opportunities for sustainable growth and employment, to replenish our dedicated county workforce with the best possible candidates, to maintain and improve our roads, to make high-speed internet a priority for all, to pursue initiatives that will stem the tide of drug, alcohol, and domestic abuse, and to secure a future that will keep our youth and attract new families, business, tourism, entrepreneurship, and agriculture to our communities, at the same time respecting and preserving our rural way of life. My children, like many of your children, have left Cayuga County because of the limited opportunities it afforded them. It's not enough to live in a beautiful, picturesque county surrounded by woods, meadows, and lakes. We need to continue to work towards creating the possibilities and solutions that will bring my children and yours home, not just for weddings, deaths, and holidays, but home to Cayuga County to build homes, family, and successful and fulfilling lives. I'd like to thank members of the Citizen, Jeremy Boyer and Robert Harding, and Steve Keeler from the Telecommunications Department at Cayuga Community College and the students associated with it, and Spectrum. I would also thank my opponent, Hans Petcher, for affording the opportunity to address Cayuga County's important concerns and future. My name is Joe DeForest. I appreciate the people of Genoa, King Ferry, Locke, and Venice's consideration. I want your vote on November 5th. There's much work to be done, and I want to be part of that work. When re-elected, I will look to you for your ideas and insights. I will be accessible, I will listen, and I will work hard for you. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, gentlemen, for not only joining us today for the first of what we hope are 7 forums, but also putting yourselves out there on the campaign trail. Not always an easy task. Again, our thanks to Jeremy Boyer of the Citizen. He'll be back on Thursday as we continue our series. We also want to thank you, the voters, for tuning in today. We hope you use this information as you go to the polls on November 5th, but do remember that you can start early voting on Saturday, October 26th at several sites within Cayuga County, including Venice, is one of the polling sites. We will be also having on the ballot something that was mentioned today, which is the term limit resolution, and we would hope that you would look at that as well and study that. That will be on the ballot as well. We'll return on Thursday for our next in our series of 2019 candidate forums with the race for the 10th legislative district that covers the northwest section of the city of Auburn. That race is for an open seat since current legislator Joseph Bennett decided not to seek re-election. In the studio will be Republican Ed Darrow against Democrat Heidi Nightingale. Next week, we'll have 2 more forums to close out our forums for the Cayuga County Legislature. The first being on Tuesday, the 15th, again, an open seat, this time because incumbent Patrick Mahunik is adhering to the 3-term limit that will see Republican Tom Odessa versus face-off against Democrat Trish Otley Kerr. And that district covers the southeast section of the city of Auburn. And then finally on Thursday, the 17th, we'll have our final legislative forum for the 14th district located in the southwest side of the city of Auburn, where incumbent Republican Majority Leader Michael Didio is seeking a third term against Democrat Gwen Weber McLeod. In 2 weeks, we'll have the candidates for the Auburn City Council. In 3, the race for mayor of the city of Auburn, and we hope in between, and we're still working on this, a race forum for the Cayuga County District Attorney's Office. Because of the number of forums we have this year, the Citizen will have it on their website, auburnpub.com, where you can tune in, and you can also go to the college's YouTube channel to watch these forums as well. The Auburn Regional Media Access, ARMA, will run these forums on Saturdays and Sundays on Spectrum Channels 12 and 98 and FiOS 31 starting at 5 o'clock. And when the college's radio station will start airing these on Saturday mornings at 10 a.m. I'm Guy Cosentino for Cayuga Community College. I want to thank you for watching. We hope you have a good night, have a great tomorrow, and we will see you back here on Thursday night.